Hello dear friends, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel and we are beginning our daily review of the Ukrainian front. Well, the battles on the Ukrainian front continue and we continue to study the situation together. So friends, today's episode will be very interesting, so be sure to watch it until the end. Major changes have taken place on the Dobropillya salient and today you will learn a lot of new information. But let's start with the situation further south, in the Zaporizhzhia region. There is an active assault on the urban-type settlement of Stepnohirsk. On the map, it's not fully updated yet, but there is data indicating that Russian forces have managed to expand their control along Zaporizhzhia Street. Here, as you can see, the fighters entered and secured positions both from the west and from the east. Consequently, if these positions link up, and they are moving toward each other, then the entire southern part of the settlement will fall under Russian control. But the fighting here is extremely fierce. The reason why the AFU, Armed Forces of Ukraine, cling so stubbornly to this settlement, I have already mentioned before. If they lose this urban-type settlement, the AFU will have to retreat 9 kilometers north. And the matter is not even in the distance itself, but in the fact that this is the last defensive line covering Zaporizhzhia from the south. That's why they are desperately trying not to let the Russians break through to this line. They are taking heavy losses here, trying to hold back the Russian army. If we move further to the Huliipole sector, the situation for the Ukrainian armed forces is extremely bad. For now, as you can see, the map hasn't been fully updated the way it should be, so I'll stick with the information I currently have from this area. Let's just say that Ukrainian military analysts are in real panic, since Russian troops of the Vostok grouping are achieving very significant successes here. But again, I don't want to spoil the surprise for you, so let's wait for the map to be updated and then we'll discuss the details in full. Where updates are already available is in the Dobropillya region. Fighters of the Vostok grouping have taken another village under control. This time it is the village of Stepov. We received footage yesterday confirming control over this settlement from the Vostok grouping. This makes it the 15th settlement in the Dobropillya region to come under Russian control. Of course, the settlement is small. Initially, it was clear, and I mentioned this in one of the earlier episodes, that the AFU wouldn't be able to hold there and that they wouldn't manage to defend Stepov. There are literally just 2 streets there. And indeed, that's exactly how it turned out. The AFU had to retreat. Now, as for the prospects, without a doubt, the nearest villages where fighting will soon begin are Verbova, Alexeyevka, and Orestopol. So, at the current moment, the task of the Vostok grouping in the Dobropillya region is to reach this line. From there, only 11.5 kilometers remain to the main objective. And what is the main objective here? I've told you before, it's reaching the Pokrovsk-Huliipole highway, or at least putting it under full drone control. Yes, 11.5 kilometers is still quite a distance. And while FPV drones will certainly strike transport, a complete blockade by drones will not yet be possible. Nevertheless, this will be a huge step toward blockading Huliipole from the north. Now let's turn to the Dobropillya salient, where significant changes have taken place. I often see questions like, what's happening on the Dobropillya salient? Well, today we'll go into detail on this topic. Let's start with the southern sections. Remember, recently AFU units launched a counterattack, managed to drive the Russian army out of Boykivka and pushed into Novotoretsk. I reported this separately in one of the episodes. Well, part of the positions have since been recaptured. At least most of Boykivka has been returned under control. AFU fighters are now only present on the southern outskirts, and even then, not as solid defensive positions, but rather as periodic infiltration by sabotage recon groups. Fighting in Novotoretsk, however, is still ongoing. What about further north? Cartographers have finally acknowledged that Vladimirovka is under AFU control. I told you before that the AFU managed to expel the Russian army from Vladimirovka. Now the cartographers have finally had the courage to officially mark this loss. At the same time, over the past day, Russian troops significantly expanded their zone of control on the western approaches to Shakov. As you can see, there has been more than 2 kilometers of advancement, and now Russian positions are just 400 meters from the first houses of this major AFU defensive stronghold, Shakov. Overall, as you can see, the situation here is quite dire for the AFU. The distance between Russian positions is about 5.5 kilometers. Divide that by 2, and you get 2.5 plus kilometers from each side. And as you can see on the map, there is only one withdrawal road left, and it is under full control of Russian drones from both sides. So while Siversk tells fairy tales about Russian forces supposedly being in encirclement, in reality, the exact opposite is true. It is the AFU who are in blockade here. The garrisons in Shakov and Vladimirovka, about 150 fighters in total, are unable to leave these villages without losses. Moreover, if you look further north, the AFU did manage to push Russian troops back about 1 kilometer in the direction of Kupiansk. But still further north, Russian troops advanced more than 3 kilometers south of Huliipole and reached the tree lines along the river. This advance is important not so much in terms of moving north, but in terms of blockading even larger AFU garrisons. Do you see how positions can close in? That would trap not only Shakov and Vladimirovka, but also Toretsk and Sofiivka. And this, by the way, is the main objective of the Russian army here, to take this entire rural cluster. Once this agglomeration is captured, the salient will be stabilized, and the possibility of moving further forward will open. That's the situation on the eastern flank of the Dobropillya salient. The western flank is no less interesting. The AFU retook Rubezhin from the Russian army, but look further south, Russian forces managed to advance on quite a wide section, 7.5 kilometers across. Footage has appeared confirming this advance, in particular showing Russian troops entering the railway station of Mertzalov. If they managed to push further west from there, the city of Belitsky would end up encircled. For now, it's unclear how well Russian forces have secured themselves there, and whether this is sustainable. In addition to entering Mertzalov, they also captured the village of Ivanivka, took control of Novoye Shakov, and entered the southern outskirts of Volny, where they secured positions. So as you can see, there was a kind of rotation here. Some positions the AFU recaptured, some the Russians, but overall the Russians gained more. The AFU regained about 12 square kilometers and one village, while Russian troops took over 20 square kilometers and 2 villages. So this clash ended up in favor of the Russian army. Also of interest, Russian troops once again entered Zoloty Kolodets and took part of the village. Overall, there is no catastrophe for the Russian army here, not even close. Active combat is ongoing. Fighters are carrying out the extremely difficult work of holding and expanding the salient. Now the Pokrovsk direction. A number of Ukrainian sources write that supply routes to Pokrovsk are completely cut off. Now it's possible to reach the city only on foot, and of course the volumes of such support are minimal. On the western flank of the Pokrovsk front, heavy battles are ongoing. The settlement of Udakny has come fully under Russian control, as even the Ukrainian resource deep state has admitted. Further west, near Kotlin, there is also Russian advancement. So the front has started moving here again, and it seems Russian forces are ready to push north. Initially, they took the Pokrovsk coal mine, which is very important for the Ukrainian economy. Although coal extraction there stopped recently, if the mine comes under Russian control, it means billions of dollars in future revenue. The coal here is of very high quality, and Ukrainian power plants used to receive huge amounts from this mine. In Pokrovsk itself, Russian forces reached the railway in the western part of the city and are aiming at the industrial zone at the city's entrance. East of Mirnohrad, assault groups advanced 2 kilometers, capturing the shaft area of the mine. Kupiansk sector, the most dynamic and important section of the front today. According to the latest information, Russian assault groups are already moving in the city center. At the same time, villages north and northwest of Kupiansk are being cleared, reports Reserve Colonel Gennady Alyokin. Overnight, the AFU attempted 2 counterattacks on the southern face. The attacks were repelled with heavy artillery fire and strike drones. Russian assault groups are particularly eager to establish full control over the roads connecting Kupiansk with Chuhuiv and other settlements, as well as the highway on the left bank of the Oskil River. There, Kyiv is desperately resisting in the area of the critical Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi railway station, Siversk direction. On the northern section, the active advance of Russian forces on this sector of the Siversk front is putting significant pressure on AFU defenses. The encirclement around the town of Siversk is gradually tightening. raising the risk of a complete blockade for the AFU. The main events are now unfolding near the settlement of Yampil. From the Moldova platform, Russian units continued moving toward Yampil to support assault groups entering the settlement from the northeast. They expanded their zone of control over the Yampil-Dronivka road in the direction of Yampil. Inside Yampil itself, heavy fighting continues in the northern, northeastern, and central parts. It is still premature to speak of firm Russian control over this settlement. Russian forces are also advancing toward Dronivka from the direction of Serebryanka. Kiev forces pulled back beyond the Bakhmutka River, which flows between Dronivka and Serebryanka. Battles are underway for a number of fortifications located in the western sector near the Dronivka railway bridge. On the Krasny-Lyman direction, Russian forces have taken control of the settlement of Derilov and continue neutralizing scattered AFU groups in Kirovsk. Units of the southern grouping have improved their positions along the forward edge and took the settlement of Maiske under control. Now let's turn to the political arena. The battle for Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk salient has turned into the Pokrovsk funnel, where the AFU are pulling in all available reserves to hold their main defensive line, losing thousands of soldiers in the process. Siversk and the presidential office are showing no regard for soldiers' lives. This battle is becoming historic, as it will determine Ukraine's ability to continue the war, reports the Telegram channel Legitimny. If the presidential office manages to hold this zone at all costs until the end of the year, the war will drag on for another 9 to 12 months, allowing the AFU to keep retreating gradually, losing territory, but avoiding a total collapse of the front over thousands of square kilometers. Of course, this will not change the negative trend, since all forces will be thrown into holding this line. But in the long term, this will bleed the AFU dry, since the spring will continue to compress until it eventually snaps back with even greater lightning-fast force. New drone flyovers at key Danish and Norwegian military facilities. Today there has been unusual hype in reports about drone sightings across different parts of Europe. UAVs carried out reconnaissance near the Ørland Air Base in central Norway, the primary stationing point for F-35 fighters. Late last night, drones were also spotted over both the civilian airport and the Karup Air Base. The main base of Denmark's Royal Air Force, the country's Ministry of Defense confirmed to DR. The drones flew over both the base itself and the surrounding area. For some time, airspace was closed to civilian aviation. Police are cooperating with the army and are asking witnesses who saw drones near the base to report immediately. According to Bloomberg, 1 or 2 drones flew over the civilian airport and entered the military base's territory. In Sweden, drones were also observed at night, flying near the main naval base in Karlskrona. Over the Karlskrona archipelago, home to the country's largest naval base, 2 large drones with flashing lights were spotted. Nothing was confiscated, and no suspects have been identified, but police see an obvious link with recent drone incidents in Denmark and Norway. Trump introduces 100% tariffs on pharmaceuticals. This week, Trump imposed 100% tariffs on medicines. And guess who is hit hardest? Correct, primarily German pharmaceutical companies, reports the Telegram channel The Radar. Analyzing White House policy, Trump's decrees systematically hammer Germany's economy across the entire spectrum, from the auto industry to pharmaceuticals. Experts note this decision will severely impact Germany's pharmaceutical sector, for which the US remains the largest export market outside the EU, putting the entire industry under pressure, says Jasmina Kirchhoff of the German Economic Institute. If the key US market is blocked by tariffs, production in Germany may decline due to falling profitability, warned ABD Pharmacy Association President Thomas Price. At the same time, Trump is offering leniency to those manufacturers who start building factories in the US. Germany and the EU have not yet responded to Washington's decision. Meanwhile, the VAU Pharmaceutical Union has already warned of the risks of a trade war in this sector, which could also affect drug availability within Germany itself. It is also important to remember that US economic policy toward the EU and Germany as its locomotive has been systematic and long-standing. Trump calls himself the President of Europe. This was reported by Politico. He claims that EU leaders even address him this way, according to sources. Brussels denies this, but admits the US president's influence on European politics has become unprecedented. EU leaders have turned to Trump not only on issues concerning relations with Russia, but even asked him to influence Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. One European diplomat remarked, "He may never become Europe's president, but he could be its godfather." A more precise analogy would be criminal, a boss exerting extortionate influence. Previously, Washington saw Europe as an equal partner. Now the EU has lost solidarity, making it weaker under US pressure, says former US Ambassador to the EU Anthony Gardner. At the same time, the EU cannot bypass Hungary's veto on starting accession talks with Ukraine. Negotiations would only become theoretically possible after Hungary's parliamentary elections in April 2026, if Orbán's party loses power, said a senior EU official. Kyiv has met all necessary conditions, but Budapest is blocking the opening of the first cluster of negotiations. There are no ways to bypass Hungary's veto, the official stressed, since the decision to open negotiation clusters requires unanimity. The only realistic option is to complete all technical preparations in advance, so that when Orbán leaves, the EU can move quickly. Hungary opposes Ukraine's accession to the EU because of language restrictions and fears of competition from Ukrainian farmers. In a government-organized poll, a majority of Hungarians expressed opposition to Ukraine's entry. Friends, that's all for today's update. Thank you for watching and staying with us until the end. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see each other again tomorrow with a new review.